It was 2 in the morning when my husband's boss sent a text to his phone. "He's mine now, he's busy, don't wait up," she wrote. I typed back, "Keep him, we're done." 20 minutes later they showed up at my front door. She had a smug grin on her face while he looked pale, but what happened next made her regret ever sending that message. "Hello everyone, thank you for being here today. Before we get into my story, please grab a warm cup of tea and get comfortable. I'd love to know what time of day you're watching this video. If it's morning, please comment M, if it's afternoon, type A, and if it's evening, leave an E. Now, let me take you into the story." Can you believe it? Right there in my own dining room, a sanctuary I had lovingly cared for a decade, my mother-in-law stood arm in arm with my husband's young mistress. She slapped a check down on the mahogany table, the sharp sound echoing in the dead silence. Then she delivered the most brutal ultimatum I had ever heard. Staring straight into my eyes, her lips curling in disgust, she said, "Take this $175,000 and get out of this house right now. My son needs a real woman, someone young and capable of giving him an heir, not a dried-up branch like you." In that moment I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just froze. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. My gaze slowly shifted to the man I had called my husband for 10 years. Dr. Garrett Vance, a highly respected OB-GYN, just stood there with his head down, silent as a marble statue. He wouldn't even look at me. His cowardice, his absolute silence, cut me 1,000 times deeper than his mother's hateful words. They stood there judging me, discarding me like trash, completely unaware that beneath my loose cashmere sweater, a tiny heartbeat had already begun. An incredible secret was growing inside me, and their cruelty today would become the catalyst for their absolute ruin tomorrow. My name is Jocelyn Vance. Just a few hours before my life completely collapsed, I was living in a pure, naive bubble of happiness. That evening I had prepared a lavish dinner. The house was filled with the aroma of roasted rosemary chicken and vanilla, his absolute favorite. I had lit scented candles in every corner, casting a warm, romantic glow across the living room. My heart was pounding with excitement. I couldn't wait to share the incredible news with Garrett. The pregnancy test that morning had shown 2 thick, unmistakable pink lines. At 48 years old, it was nothing short of a biological miracle. After years of failed IVF cycles, years of silent prayers and negative results, I had finally conceived naturally. I truly believed this child would be the bond that healed the tiny fractures in our marriage. I thought this baby would finally silence my mother-in-law's poisonous comments for good. But just as the grandfather clock in the hall struck 7, the front door wasn't just opened, it was pushed wide. Garrett walked in, but the warm greeting died in my throat because he wasn't alone. Flanking him was his mother, Bernice Vance, with a sour expression that could curdle milk. And behind them stood Tiffany Sterling, a 28-year-old woman in an expensive designer dress that clung to her curves, eyeing my home as if she already owned it. "Who is this?" I stammered, my voice trembling. My heart felt like it was caught in a vice. Garrett couldn't look me in the eye. He shifted uncomfortably, trying to pull his arm away from Tiffany's grip, but his mother stepped forward, blocking my view of him. Bernice stood in front of her son, looking at me with triumphant contempt. "Let me introduce you," she sneered. "This is Tiffany Sterling. She's the daughter of Carlton Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Pharmaceuticals. You know, the biggest partner of the hospital where Garrett works. More importantly, she's carrying my son's child, the grandchild you could never give me because you're simply too old." Each word felt like a sledgehammer to my chest. I was paralyzed. My husband was having an affair. He was having a child with another woman. Suddenly, all the fragmented pieces in my mind clicked together. The late nights, the expensive new cologne, the distant look in his eyes. "Why did you bring me here for this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "Smart," Bernice mocked. "We brought you here to give you a choice. Here are the divorce papers already signed by Garrett, and here is a check for $175,000. Take the money, sign the papers, and disappear. Consider it severance pay for your 10 years of service." Service? She called my marriage a service. I looked at Garrett, desperately searching for an explanation. "Garrett, you're just letting her do this, after everything we've built." Garrett finally raised his head, his eyes watery but weak. "I'm sorry, Jocelyn, my mother is right, I need a legacy. Tiffany gives me a future. You and I, we're just history." History, 10 years thrown away for a younger model. Tiffany stepped closer, a manicured hand resting on her stomach, giving me a smug smile. "Be reasonable, Jocelyn, don't make this difficult. Garrett needs a family, not a retirement home companion." My hands, resting on my lap, involuntarily clenched into fists. Then I slowly lifted one and placed it gently over my own stomach. There, a tiny life was growing too. My child, his child. But I knew I couldn't speak the truth. Revealing it now would be a humiliation. Using a baby as a bargaining chip to cling to a man who didn't want me was pathetic. My child was not going to be a negotiating tool. A terrifying coldness wrapped around my soul, freezing my tears before they could fall. The heartbreak hardened into defiance, and that defiance gave me a strange, trembling power. I stood up slowly. I picked up the $175,000 check from the table. Bernice and Tiffany watched me with satisfied smiles, thinking they had won. But to their absolute horror, I ripped the check right down the middle. Then I ripped it again, and again, until it was nothing but confetti raining down over the roasted chicken. "Your money is no good to me," I said, my voice steady and cold as steel. I picked up the pen and signed my name on the divorce papers with a flourish. "I am leaving, not because you are throwing me out, but because the very thought of sharing a roof with people like you makes me sick." I walked to the door, grabbing nothing but my coat. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't look back. As I stepped out into the biting Chicago winter wind, Bernice screamed after me, "Don't come crawling back when you run out of money." "I won't be crawling," I thought to myself. "You have absolutely no idea who you just declared war on." Before we continue, I just want to say thank you so much for listening. Reliving this is difficult, but having you here helps immensely. Please let me know in the comments which city you're listening from tonight. It makes me feel a little less alone in this big world. The freezing Chicago wind whipped against my face, stinging my cheeks, but I barely felt it. My body was numb, but my mind was racing with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I hailed a cab, its yellow headlights cutting through the swirling snow. When the driver pulled over, he looked at me with concern. Standing in a blizzard with no luggage, wearing nothing but a loungewear sweater under my coat, I must have looked like a madwoman who had just walked out on her life. "Where to, ma'am?" he asked, turning up the heat. I took a deep breath. For 10 years the address I gave had been the modest suburban house I shared with Garrett, but tonight that life was dead. "Monroe Street, the Legacy Tower," I said. The driver raised an eyebrow. The Legacy Tower was the most exclusive residential building in the city, home to CEOs, professional athletes, and old money. It wasn't a place for a middle-aged woman who looked like a discarded, desperate housewife, but he put the car in drive anyway. As we navigated the snow-covered streets, I stared out the window, watching the city blur. Bernice thought she had won. She thought she had thrown a penniless, agging woman onto the streets. Garrett thought he was the successful provider who had been supporting me all along. They were both so blissfully, arrogantly wrong. You see, I had a secret I had kept buried deep for a decade. To Garrett and his family, I was Jocelyn the housewife, a former library archivist who had given up her career to support her husband's medical journey. But in the financial world, under a completely different name, I was a ghost. I was a whale in the stock market. My father had been a brilliant investor who taught me everything before he passed away. A man who ended his own life after being cleaned out by a woman who claimed to love him, but only loved his wealth. Because of what happened to my father. I was terrified of being loved for my net worth. When I met Garrett, I hid everything. I wanted to be loved for who I was. I wanted a partner, not a parasite. So I lived simply. I let him believe his doctor's salary was our primary income. I clipped coupons. I drove a 10-year-old sedan. Meanwhile, my investment portfolio was compounding into hundreds of millions of dollars. When the cab pulled up to the gleaming glass entrance of the Legacy Tower, the doorman, who had been paid handsomely for years to maintain my empty property, rushed out with an umbrella. "Mrs. Vance, I mean Miss Vance," he corrected himself, seeing my face. "Welcome back, we didn't expect you." "I didn't expect to be here either, Robert." I handed the cab driver a $100 bill and told him to keep the change. I took the private elevator straight to the penthouse. When the doors slid open, I stepped into a sanctuary I hadn't set foot in for 5 years. It was a 6,000-square-foot duplex with floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the entire glittering Chicago skyline. The air inside was a little stale, but familiar. I walked through the dark, massive living space and flipped a switch. The crystal chandeliers flooded the room with light, illuminating the Italian marble floors and modern art on the walls. This was my apartment, paid for in full with cash. My net worth was easily triple the entire market value of Sterling Pharmaceuticals at its absolute peak. I had played Cinderella, scrubbing floors and roasting chickens, while keeping my crown hidden away in a closet. And for what? To be discarded like an old shoe because I had a few wrinkles and hadn't produced a child on their schedule. I walked into the master bathroom, turned on the gold fixtures and started a bath in the oversized tub. I caught my reflection in the massive mirror. I saw a 48-year-old woman. Yes, there were lines around my eyes. Yes, my skin didn't have the tightness of a 20-year-old, but I saw something else too. I saw resilience. I saw power. I placed both hands over my stomach, the secret life inside me, a miracle. I'm sorry, I whispered to my reflection, tears finally spilling over. I'm sorry I let them treat us that way. I'm sorry I chose a coward for your father. I thought about Garrett. He was probably popping champagne with Tiffany and Bernice right now, celebrating their victory, celebrating the legacy Tiffany was supposed to be carrying. They had absolutely no idea they had declared war on the wrong woman. They thought they were cutting off a financial burden, but they had actually just severed their own lifeline. I reached into the closet safe for my secure phone. It was time to make a call. It was time to wake the sleeping dragon. I dialed Mitchell Grave, my attorney and the only man who knew the true scope of my empire. Mitchell, I said when he answered, my voice steadying. It's over, I'm at the penthouse. Activate Plan B. I want a full audit of every dime I ever funneled into Garrett's career. And Mitchell, find out everything you can on Sterling Pharmaceuticals. I'm going hunting. As I waited for the bath to fill in my empty penthouse, the steam rising around me, my mind drifted back 10 years. I needed to remember why. Why did I fall for him? Why did I hide who I was? I met Garrett when I was 38 and he was 40. It was a rainy Tuesday at a coffee shop near the university hospital. Back then, he wasn't the polished, arrogant Dr. Vance. He was exhausted, wearing faded scrubs, counting out quarters on the counter to see if he could afford a muffin with his black coffee. He looked completely defeated. I was sitting in the corner reading, dressed in jeans and a sweater. I watched him put the muffin back. Something tugged at my heart. I stepped up, paid for his order and added a sandwich. You look like a hero who saves lives, I said. You should probably eat. The look of gratitude and humility in his eyes was something I'd never forget. We ended up sitting down and talking for 2 hours. He told me about his struggles. He was a brilliant doctor with a passion for obstetrics, but he was drowning in student loans and hospital politics. He told me about his late father, who had worked himself to death, and his mother, Bernice, whom he was supporting entirely. I just want to help women bring life into this world safely, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But the system is rigged. I can't get the fellowship I need because I don't have the connections or the money to buy my way in. I fell in love with that passion. I fell in love with the man who wanted to save lives but couldn't afford a sandwich. I didn't tell him I was an investor. I told him I worked at a library. It was a half-truth. I volunteered there because I loved books. Our courtship was simple. Walks in the park, movies in his cramped apartment. He made me feel safe. He didn't care about luxury cars or designer clothes, or so I thought. He seemed to love my mind, my quiet support. But I couldn't stand watching him struggle. 6 months into our relationship, a miracle happened. Garrett received a letter from a private foundation, the Phoenix Trust, awarding him a fully funded European fellowship for advanced robotic surgery training. It included a stipend that wiped out his debts. He ran to me, waving the letter, tears streaming down his face. Jocelyn, I can't believe it. Someone believes in me. He had no idea that the Phoenix Trust was a shell company I had set up the week before. He had no idea the signature on the grant belonged to my lawyer. I paid for his education. I cleared his loans. I paved the way for him to become a star. When he returned from Europe, he was a changed man, confident, highly skilled. He was offered positions at top hospitals. We married in a small ceremony. I insisted on a prenuptial agreement keeping our premarital assets separate, ostensibly to protect him from my meager debts, but really to safeguard my fortune just in case. He signed it without looking, laughing that he would always take care of me. I'm going to give you the world, Jocelyn, he vowed at the altar. You believed in me when I was nothing. I believed him. I thought we were building a partnership. But looking back now, I see the cracks I chose to ignore. He started enjoying the praise a little too much. He started deferring to his mother, Bernice, who suddenly appeared to manage his success. Bernice, the woman who poisoned the well. She moved into a house 10 minutes away, bought for her by Garrett with his first major bonus. She never thanked me for standing by him during the lean years. In her eyes, I was just a placeholder who got lucky with a doctor. Sitting in that penthouse tub, the hot water could barely melt the chill in my bones. I had created Dr. Garrett Vance. I used my wealth to polish a stone until it shone like a diamond, and once he sparkled, he decided I was too dull to stand beside him. He forgot the woman who bought him a sandwich. He forgot that without the Phoenix Trust, he'd still be a tired resident counting quarters. But he was about to be reminded. The Phoenix was about to rise again, and this time it was going to burn everything down. If Garrett was the instrument of my betrayal, Bernice was the architect. The first few years of our marriage were relatively peaceful, mostly because Garrett worked 80 hours a week building his practice. But as he grew successful, Bernice became unbearable. The real nightmare began when we tried to have children. I was 42 at the time. Garrett was an obgyn, he knew the statistics, he knew it would be difficult. But he was supportive at first. We tried naturally for a year, nothing. Then we turned to IVF. Do you know the physical and emotional toll IVF takes on a woman? The daily injections, the bruising, the hormones that make you feel like you're losing your mind, the invasive procedures. I went through 4 cycles. 4 times I had hope. 4 times I was devastated by failed implantations or early losses. Garrett's support began to wane. He stopped coming to appointments, claiming he was too busy with patients. "It's ironic," he said coldly one evening. "I spend all day delivering Barbies for other women, and I come home to this." But Bernice was the worst. She would come over for Sunday dinners, inspecting the house with a white glove attitude, and then sit down to dismantle me with her words. "Garrett is the last of the Vance line," she would say, sipping tea I had brewed. "A man of his stature needs a legacy. What good is a wife who's like a barren field? You're drying up, Jocelyn, it's just biology. You can't fight nature." I remember one Christmas vividly. I had just suffered my 3rd early loss. I was broken, emotionally bleeding out. Bernice arrived with gifts. She brought Garrett a gold watch. For me. She handed over a book titled Finding Purpose in a Childless Life. "I thought this might help you accept reality," she said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Stop wasting my son's money on these treatments. It's selfish. You're using his hard-earned cash to buy hope, his money." She always talked about his money. She had no idea I was paying for the IVF cycles out of a separate account of my own, not wanting Garrett to worry about the expense. She had no idea the very house over her head was bought with the dividends of my investments, disguised as Garrett's bonuses through clever accounting. That Christmas I looked at Garrett, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to tell his mother to get out. He just took a sip of his eggnog and said, "Mom, don't be so harsh." That was it, don't be so harsh, not stop, not I love my wife, just a weak plea to lower the volume of the abuse. In that moment I realized I was alone in my marriage. I was fighting for a family, and he had already checked out. Bernice escalated her efforts. She began inviting eligible women to family functions, daughters of his colleagues, younger women. Just networking, she would claim. She would parade them in front of Garrett, pointing out their youth, their vitality. "Look at Sarah," she would whisper loudly. "Only 25, so much energy. She'd make a wonderful mother." I swallowed the insults. I stayed silent because I loved Garrett, and I thought he was just under stress. I thought if I could just give him a child, everything would go back to the way it was when we met in that coffee shop. What a fool I was. I was trying to grow flowers in a garden his mother had salted and he had abandoned. But the final blow didn't come from my perceived failure. It came from success, his success. As Garrett became a minor celebrity in the Chicago medical community, his ego ballooned. He started believing his mother's hype. He began to see himself as a king who deserved a queen, rather than a tired soldier who needed a partner. That was when Tiffany Sterling walked into his office. She wasn't just young, she was the daughter of the man who could hand Garrett the keys to a medical kingdom. Bernice saw it instantly. She didn't just see a womb in Tiffany, she saw a bank vault, and she decided right then and there that I had to be cleared away. Sitting in my penthouse now, remembering those years of humiliation, a fire ignited in my chest. Bernice wanted a legacy. I was going to give her one. I was going to ensure the Vance name was remembered for its absolute financial ruin and public disgrace. The affair didn't start with a bang, it started with a scent. A sickeningly sweet floral perfume, midnight rose, highly expensive and unmistakable. I smelled it on Garrett's collar for the first time when he came home late from a hospital board dinner. I hugged the CEO's wife, he lied smoothly when I asked. She was practically drowning in the stuff. I wanted to believe him, but then the changes started. Garrett, who had worn basic scrubs and sensible loafers for years, suddenly bought 3 $5,000 Italian suits. He started getting facials. He joined an exclusive gym he never used to go to. He was a 50-year-old man having a midlife crisis, trying to keep up with someone half his age. That someone was Tiffany Sterling. I did my research. Long before Bernice introduced us, I knew exactly who she was. 28 years old, a socialite who had never worked a day in her life. Her father, Carlton Sterling, owned the pharmaceutical giant that supplied Garrett's hospital. Tiffany was famous in the tabloids for her shopping sprees and temper tantrums. I started finding receipts, not for hotels, Garrett wasn't that stupid, but for gifts. A diamond tennis bracelet from Cartier, a vintage Chanel bag. They were charged to a credit card he thought I couldn't monitor, but I was a financial analyst. Tracking numbers was my job. I watched the money drain away. The worst part wasn't the money, it was the emotional replacement. Garrett stopped talking to me altogether. When he was home, he stared at his phone, smiling at text like a teenager. If I asked about his day, he would sigh as if my voice were a physical burden. "You wouldn't understand, Jocelyn," he'd say dismissively. "It's complex medical politics." He forgot that for 10 years, I was the one who helped him navigate those exact politics. Then came the business trips. Weekend conferences in Miami, seminars in Aspen. I knew he wasn't alone. I tracked his flight records, another perk of my connections. He flew first class, seat 1A, seat 1B was always booked under T. Sterling. I remember the night he came home smelling of that perfume and alcohol. I was sitting in the living room waiting. "Garrett, we need to talk," I said calmly. He exploded. "For God's sake, Jocelyn, can I not have a moment of peace? I work myself to the bone to support this house, to keep you comfortable, and I come home to an interrogation." Gaslighting, he turned himself into the victim. He made me feel like a nagging burden just for asking why he smelled of another woman. "I only ask because I miss you," I whispered. "Well, maybe if you were more interesting," he snapped. "Maybe if you didn't look so miserable all the time. Look at yourself, Jocelyn, you've completely let yourself go. You dress like a librarian, you have no ambition." Ambition? I was managing an investment portfolio that could buy the very wing of the hospital he worked in, and he told me I had no ambition. But I bit my tongue. I was still holding on to the hope of a pregnancy. I thought if I could just give him a child, he would leave her. He was just infatuated with her youth. He would come back to reality. Bernice, of course, poured fuel on the fire. I later learned she was the one arranging their dates. She would invite Tiffany to lunch near the hospital and tell Garrett to join them. She was actively playing matchmaker, trading her own son's integrity to secure access to the Sterling fortune. I felt like I was living in a funhouse mirror maze. Everything was distorted. The man I loved was a stranger. My mother-in-law was a co-conspirator. The mistress was a trophy. Yet I stayed. Why do women stay? The sunk cost fallacy. I had invested 10 years into this man, secretly poured millions into him and given him my entire heart. I didn't want to walk away and let someone else reap the rewards of my investment. I wanted to fix it. It wasn't until that final night when they brought the conflict into my living room that I realized there was nothing left to fix. The rot went all the way to the core. Garrett wasn't just having a crisis, he was weak at his foundation. He chose the shiny object over the solid ground. He chose the corrupt shortcut over the difficult path of integrity. And Tiffany, she wasn't just a passive participant, she knew he was married. She enjoyed the game. I saw the way she looked at me that night like I was a bug she wanted to step on. She didn't love Garrett, she loved the power of taking what belonged to someone else. She loved the thrill of stealing another woman's husband. Well, she could have him. She could have the debt, the stress, and the mother-in-law. I was taking the only thing that mattered, my dignity and the air quietly growing inside me. 2 weeks before the confrontation, I discovered the true depth of their deception. Years ago, I had installed a simple nanny cam in the living room, initially to keep an eye on a cleaner I suspected of stealing, but I kept it active for security. I was volunteering at the library when my phone buzzed with an alert. Motion detected. I opened the app. It was noon on a Tuesday. Garrett was supposed to be at work. On my screen, I saw Garrett, Bernice, and Tiffany sitting in my living room. They were drinking my wine. "She has to go, Garrett," Tiffany was whining. "I can't keep living in that condo. I want this house. It has the perfect nursery." Patience, babe, Garrett soothed, rubbing her back. I have to find a legal way to get her out without giving up half the assets. The prenup protects my premarital property, but this house, we bought it while married. Just make her life miserable until she leaves, Bernice suggested, taking a sip of Chardonnay. Tell her you're cutting off her allowance. Tell her she's a burden. Break her spirit. Hearing them plot my psychological undoing was chilling, but then came the real revelation. Besides, Bernice clapped her hands gleefully, we have the ultimate leverage, the baby, my grandchild. Tiffany giggled, placing a hand over her flat stomach. I can't believe it happened so fast. You're sure she won't suspect anything? Suspect what? Garrett asked, looking confused. The timeline overlapping with your marriage, Tiffany laughed. Who cares, we'll just say we're soulmates. Then Tiffany said something that struck me as bizarre. She reached for her wine glass and took a large gulp. God, I need this. Being pregnant is exhausting work. She made air quotes with her fingers when she said the word pregnant. Garrett didn't see it, he was looking at his phone. But I saw it. Air quotes. Red wine. Pregnant women do not drink large gulps of wine, and they certainly do not use air quotes to describe their condition. A cold suspicion settled in my stomach. Was she faking it? Was this the leverage used to force Garrett's hand? Garrett was an obgyn, but even the best doctors can be completely blind when it comes to their personal lives. Or perhaps she was just being reckless in the early stages. Either way, the plan was clear. They were going to use this pregnancy to displace me. They wanted my home, my safe space, to raise a child born of an affair. I went home that night and acted completely normal, but I started moving my valuable jewelry to a safety deposit box. I started transferring digital copies of my financial records to a secure cloud server. I prepared for the end. But the universe has a twisted sense of humor. The very next week I started feeling nauseous. My period was late. I assumed it was stress or perhaps menopause coming to call. I took a test just to rule it out. Positive. I stared at the stick in the bathroom trash can, shaking all over. I pulled it back out. Positive. I took 3 more, all positive. At 48, it was impossible, a statistical anomaly. To be certain, I went to a clinic 2 towns over under an assumed name. The doctor confirmed it. You're about 8 weeks along, she said. The heartbeat is strong. I walked out of that clinic in a daze. I was pregnant. The one thing I had craved for a decade had happened, just as my husband was plotting to kick me to the curb for a younger woman who was likely fabricating her own pregnancy. I had a choice. I could tell him. I could use this child to save my marriage. I could say, look, I can give you an heir too. But after watching the video of them plotting in my living room, I realized I didn't want to fight for Garrett. He was compromised. He was weak. If I told him, he might stay out of obligation, but he would still resent me. Or worse, Bernice would try to take the child. She would claim I was too old, incompetent, and sue for custody. No, this child was mine. So when the night of the confrontation arrived, and Bernice slapped that check onto the table and called me a dried-up branch, I almost laughed. I was carrying the only true Vance heir, while he was leaving me for a woman drinking wine and using air quotes. Signing those papers wasn't a defeat, it was a strategic withdrawal. I was rescuing my son from a toxic environment. I walked away to build a fortress where they could never harm us. Back in the penthouse, the early morning sun was hitting the glass walls, but I hadn't slept a wink. I had spent the entire night reviewing files with Mitchell Grave. Mitchell arrived at 7:00 a.m. sharp, looking immaculate in a charcoal suit. He was the only man I trusted. He had been my father's protégé and had sworn to protect me. You look terrible, Jocelyn, he said, handing me a strong coffee, but your financial standing looks incredible. Cut the flattery, Mitchell, my voice rasped. Is it done? It's done, Mitchell nodded, opening his laptop. We have notified the hospital board. The anonymous donor known as the Phoenix has officially withdrawn all future funding. This includes the new robotic surgery wing Garrett was scheduled to head. We've also revoked his research grants. Effectively, his department is now facing a $10 million deficit. Perfect, I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. And what about Sterling's accounts? Mitchell smiled, a sharp, cold look that meant business. I've already started shorting Sterling Pharmaceuticals. Plus, I've directed our shell companies to buy up the exclusive rights to the raw materials they import from India. Within 3 months, their supply chain will be completely choked off. Their stock is going to crater. I want them to feel the consequences, Mitchell, I replied, looking out at the city skyline below. I want Garrett to realize that his supposed genius was entirely funded by his wife, and I want Carlton Sterling to panic. There is one more thing, Mitchell said, his tone softening slightly. You need to see a doctor, a real one. You're 48, Jocelyn. This is a high-risk pregnancy. You need the absolute best medical care money can buy. I can't go to any hospital within Garrett's medical network, I said. He'll find out immediately. I know, that's why I've set up an appointment with Dr. Alcott at St. Mary's. It's a public hospital, incredibly busy, but she is the absolute best when it comes to high-risk cases. It's on the other side of town. Garrett would never set foot in there. He's far too snobbish to ever look at public health care. Later that afternoon, I went to see Dr. Alcott. She was a stern woman with greying hair and kind, perceptive eyes. As she performed the ultrasound, that distinct, rhythmic heartbeat filled the room, and everything suddenly became undeniably real. The baby looks healthy, she said, wiping the gel from my stomach, but your blood pressure is dangerously high. Given your age, you are at serious risk for preeclampsia. You need zero stress, no drama whatsoever. Can you manage that? I am currently in the middle of a high-stakes divorce and a corporate war, I replied dryly. Then you better find a way to find your inner peace, she warned. Otherwise you won't make it to full term. Leaving the hospital, a wave of vulnerability washed over me. I possessed all the wealth in the world, but I couldn't buy a guarantee for my child's safety. I had to be incredibly careful. Over the next few months, I completely dropped off the grid. I changed my phone number and stayed inside my penthouse. I hired a private chef to prepare nutritious meals and practiced prenatal yoga. From a safe distance, I watched as my plan began to unravel their lives. It started slowly. First came the news headlines. Sterling Pharmaceuticals faces major supply chain disruption. Then came the hospital gossip, passed along by Mitchell. Garrett's brand new private wing was put on indefinite hold due to sudden budget cuts. Garrett was visibly panicking. I knew this because he tried emailing my old account, desperately asking if I knew anything about Phoenix Trust, thinking back to all the reading I did during my volunteer days at the library. He was grasping at straws. I simply deleted the emails without responding. Yet they still tried to put on a brave face for the public. They were planning a wedding. The wedding of the century, the tabloids called it. Naturally, I wasn't invited, but I watched. Oh, I kept a very close eye on them. The wedding took place 3 months after I left. Held at a grand hotel, it was an incredibly lavish affair, easily costing $500,000. I sat in my penthouse, wrapped in a blanket, eating pickles and ice cream, watching the live stream on a local magazine's social page. Tiffany looked stunning, I had to admit. She wore a custom Vera Wang gown designed to accentuate her baby bump, though strangely after 3 months that bump hadn't grown much at all. She radiated joy, soaking in all the media attention. Garrett, however, looked like he was attending a funeral. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. He looked noticeably thinner and completely exhausted. The immense stress of the hospital funding cuts was clearly taking a massive toll on him. I zoomed in on the screen during the reception. The party was in full swing, and I noticed Tiffany holding a glass of champagne. She took a sip, then another, and then laughed, throwing her head back as she drained the entire glass. Interesting, I murmured to the empty room. Expectant mothers don't exactly chug Dom Perignon. Sitting across from me reviewing legal briefs, Mitchell asked, "Maybe it's sparkling cider." "Tiffany Sterling doesn't drink cider," I replied. "She isn't pregnant at all, Mitchell. I knew it, she trapped him." "If she's fabricating this pregnancy, that entire marriage is built on a ticking time bomb," Mitchell pointed out. "Garrett is absolutely obsessed with having an heir." "Then let it detonate," I said. "But not just yet, I want him to experience the struggle first." On screen, Bernice stepped up to give a toast. Wearing a purple sequined dress, she looked like a peacock preening for attention. "To my wonderful son," she shrilled into the microphone, "and to his beautiful wife who has given us the greatest gift of all, the next generation of the Vance family." I saw Garrett flinch. The moment she mentioned the baby, he visibly cringed. Was he starting to suspect something too? Or was he simply terrified of the reality crashing down on him? The irony was beautiful. There they were in that crowded ballroom, celebrating a child that didn't exist. And here I was in my quiet tower, with the true heir of the Vance family actively kicking against my ribs. I turned off the screen. I've seen enough. What's the next move? Mitchell asked. Now, I said, placing a hand on my stomach, we apply the pressure, raise the rent on Garrett's private clinic building, and let's trigger the default clauses in Sterling's supply contracts. Let's see how much love is left when the money vanishes. When I went to bed that night, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and satisfaction. I had loved Garrett once. Watching him trap himself in a prison of his own making was tragic, but he was the one who threw away the key. He could have chosen loyalty. Instead, he chose greed. As I drifted off to sleep, I whispered to my unborn son, "You will never be like him. You will be strong, you will be kind, and you will grow up knowing that a woman is not a broken branch to be casually cast aside." The real battle was just beginning, and I was the one directing the strategy. While I was quietly preparing for motherhood in my safe haven, Garrett was discovering that his dream life was actually a high-security prison. As I mentioned, I had my sources. Mitchell kept a close eye on the financial movements, but Chicago gossip travels faster than light, especially among mansion staff. After the wedding, Garrett moved into the Sterling estate. It was supposed to be a massive step up from our comfortable suburban home, a grand leap into high society. Instead, it was a rapid descent into absolute misery. The updates I received painted a grim picture. Tiffany, the supposedly sweet bride, dropped her act the second the ring was on her finger. She didn't want a partner, she wanted an educated servant. She treated Garrett like a mere accessory to parade around at galas, only to put him right back in his box the moment she got bored. The very first crack in their perfect facade involved their living arrangements. Tiffany claimed her pregnancy made her incredibly sensitive to sound and movement, promptly exiling Garrett to the guest wing. "I need proper rest for the sake of my heir, darling," she told him in that sweet, manipulative voice. "You simply breathe too loudly." And so, the man who used to complain that I didn't make his life exciting enough found himself sleeping entirely alone in a cold guest room, barred from even touching his own wife. Then there was Bernice. My dear former mother-in-law thought she had hit the absolute jackpot. She immediately sold the house Garrett had bought for her and moved into the Sterling estate, fully expecting to rule the place. But Tiffany Sterling had absolutely no intention of sharing power. One look at Bernice's floral couches and cheap knickknacks, and Tiffany ordered them straight to the dumpster. She banished Bernice to the carriage house, a glorified shed at the back of the property usually reserved for the groundskeepers. "You'll be much more comfortable out there, Bernice," Tiffany told her coldly. "That way the main staff won't disturb you." I heard Bernice spent her days crying, finally realizing she had traded a respectful, caring daughter-in-law for someone who treated her like an unwelcome stray dog. But for Garrett, the absolute worst part was the professional humiliation. Carlton Sterling, his new father-in-law, was an absolute tyrant. He didn't view Garrett as a son. He saw him as a business investment that wasn't producing returns fast enough. Every single Sunday dinner became a brutal interrogation. "Why aren't the profits up at the new clinic, Garrett?" Carlton would demand. "I poured millions into that facility. Why are VIP patients cancelling their appointments?" Garrett couldn't tell him the truth. That Phoenix Trust, which was secretly me, had withdrawn all funding, and the hospital board was completely freezing him out. He couldn't admit that without my invisible hand guiding his career, he was just an ordinary doctor with zero business acumen. "It's just temporary market fluctuations, sir," Garrett would stammer. "Fix it," Carlton would snap, "or you'll find yourself out on the street. I don't tolerate dead weight." Garrett was utterly trapped. He lived in a mansion he didn't own, was married to a wife who refused to share a bed with him, worked for a father-in-law who openly despised him, and had to support a miserable mother. He had chased after the glittering prize, and now it was completely suffocating him. Sometimes, late at night, I would look out at the city lights and wonder if he ever thought about me. Did he remember the quiet nights we spent on the couch watching movies? Did he miss the peace? I didn't know it at the time, but he absolutely did. A nurse at his hospital who remained quietly loyal to me mentioned that she found him in the break room one evening, staring intensely at an old photo of the two of us on his phone. The moment he saw her, he quickly swiped it away, his eyes visibly red. He was finally starting to realize the catastrophic mistake he had made. But he was far too proud and deeply entrenched to admit it. He genuinely believed he could still turn it around. He thought the baby, Tiffany's child, would solve everything. He clung to that lie like a drowning man holding onto a heavy stone, completely unaware that the stone was the very thing dragging him to the bottom. By the time I reached my 6th month, my pregnancy was undeniably visible, and I loved it. I loved the weight of it. It felt like the only real, honest thing in my entire life. Meanwhile, my campaign against Garrett moved into its next phase, the real estate squeeze. When Garrett left me, he took his private practice with him. Or rather, he took the name. The physical building where his high-end, premium OB-GYN clinic was located was a completely different story. Years ago, operating through a shell company called Aurora Holdings, I had purchased the medical building Garrett leased space from. I never told him. I allowed him to lease the space at well below market rate for years, essentially subsidizing his entire business. It was my quiet way of supporting him without bruising his fragile ego. But now, Aurora Holdings had a brand new policy. I instructed Mitchell to send the official notice, an immediate non-renewal of the lease. Or, due to rezoning and extensive luxury upgrades, he could choose to renew at 400% of the current market rate. I truly wish I could have seen the look on his face when he opened that letter. Garrett was already bleeding cash. The Phoenix Trust money was entirely gone. His hospital's salary was slashed due to funding cuts. And Tiffany, she was spending money faster than he could ever hope to make it. Her maternity wardrobe alone cost more than a brand new sedan. In absolute desperation, Garrett dialed the number listed on the letterhead. He had no idea he was calling a burner phone sitting right on my coffee table. Mitchell answered, using a digital voice modulator. Aurora Holdings, how can I help you? This is Dr. Vance, Garrett said, his voice sounding frantic and completely out of breath. I received a rent increase notice. This has to be a mistake. You've raised my rent to $40,000 a month. I can't afford that. I've been a loyal tenant for years. New management, Dr. Vance, Mitchell responded coldly. The owners are looking for more financially solvent clients. If you cannot meet the terms, you have 30 days to vacate the premises. 30 days, I have patience, I have high-end equipment. My father-in-law is Carlton Sterling. Do you have any idea who he is? We are well aware of Mr. Sterling, Mitchell said, and I could practically hear the smirk in his voice. His credit rating was recently downgraded, so that won't be helping your case. Either pay the updated rate or start packing. Garrett slammed the phone down. He was forced to go straight to Carlton Sterling to beg for the money. I heard about the explosive argument later from the estate staff. You want more money? Carlton roared, throwing a glass vase directly against the wall. You useless leech. You told me this clinic was a goldmine. It's just a temporary setback, Garrett pleaded. The landlords are completely extorting me. You're the doctor, figure it out. Carlton ultimately wrote the check, but not without completely humiliating Garrett first. He forced Garrett to sign a promissory note, putting up his own future earnings as collateral. Garrett effectively sold his soul just to keep operating inside a building that I owned. I took that check, $4 million of sterling funds, and deposited it directly into a college fund for my unborn son. It felt like pure poetic justice. The man who kicked me out because I was Barren was now unknowingly financing his true son's future Ivy League education. But the immense pressure was starting to fracture Garrett. He looked hollowed out. His hands, usually as steady as an elite surgeon's should be, began to develop a noticeable tremor. His patients certainly noticed. The online reviews for his practice began to plummet. Dr. Vance seems completely distracted and impatient. He rushed through my prenatal checkup. I no longer feel safe under his care. The stellar reputation he spent a decade building with my quiet support was crumbling piece by piece. He was learning the hard way that without a solid foundation, the tower cannot stand. And the heaviest blow was still to come, because while I was squeezing his clinic, Mitchell was busy dismantling the entire sterling empire that Garrett was relying on for survival. The arrival of my 7th month brought a harsh winter to Chicago, along with a devastating storm for the Sterling family. My plan to cut off their supply chain worked far faster than I had even anticipated. Sterling Pharmaceuticals relied heavily on a very specific precursor chemical imported from India and processed in Europe. It was the crucial ingredient for their top-selling cardiac medication. When my shell company secured the exclusive rights to that chemical and stopped selling to Sterling, their production lines ground to an immediate halt. But that was just standard business. What truly destroyed them was actual criminal desperation. Mitchell discovered that in an effort to cut costs and cover the massive supply gap, Carlton Sterling had started purchasing black market chemicals from unverified labs overseas. These chemicals were impure, highly dangerous, and entirely illegal. He was repackaging them and selling them as premium pharmaceuticals. It was outright fraud, a massive public safety hazard, and corporate racketeering. I held onto the evidence for weeks, waiting for the absolute perfect moment to strike. That moment arrived when Carlton announced a major press conference to launch a revolutionary new drug, a desperate attempt to inflate their plummeting stock price. The morning of the press conference, I forwarded the complete files to the FDA and the FBI. I watched it unfold live on television. Carlton Sterling stood proudly at the podium, looking arrogant and untouchable, with Tiffany and Garrett standing right behind him like stage props. "This medication represents the future of healthcare," Carlton announced confidently. Suddenly, absolute chaos erupted at the back of the room. Federal agents in marked jackets flooded the stage. The cameras kept rolling and flashes went off frantically. "Carlton Sterling, you are under arrest for corporate fraud, distribution of adulterated substances, and money laundering." The look on Garrett's face was absolutely priceless, a mix of sheer terror and utter confusion. He visibly backed away from his father-in-law as if the man were radioactive. Tiffany started screaming, "Do you have any idea who we are? Get your hands off him." They cuffed Carlton and led him away. The stock market reacted instantly. Sterling Pharmaceuticals completely collapsed, vaporizing 80% of its value in less than an hour. When Garrett returned home that evening, he faced a mansion actively being raided. Asset forfeiture agents were seizing vehicles, artwork, and luxury jewelry. They were freezing every single account. Garrett finally realized he hadn't married into high society, he had married directly into a criminal enterprise. And because he had signed those promissory notes to Carlton, his own finances were now completely entangled in the federal investigation. He was entirely broke. His clinic was failing, his landlord, me, was demanding rent, and his main financial backer was behind bars. As for his wife, Tiffany was completely hysterical, not because her father was in prison but because her credit cards were being declined. She screamed at Garrett, demanding he fix it. "Fix what, Tiffany?" Garrett yelled back, finally snapping. "I have nothing left, your father ruined us, we are going to lose everything." "You're the man, figure it out," she shrieked. "I'm a doctor, not a magician." In that moment of complete ruin, Garrett must have looked around that chaotic room filled with federal agents, crying staff, and a screaming wife, and remembered our quiet evenings at home. He must have missed the stability I provided. He had traded true peace for an absolute circus. He was drowning, and there wasn't a lifeboat in sight. At least, that's what he thought. He had no idea that the only person who could save him was the very woman he abandoned, watching him from her penthouse tower, holding the controls to his complete downfall. With the Sterling assets completely frozen, life inside the mansion became utterly unbearable. The staff quit because their paychecks were bouncing. Suddenly, Princess Tiffany had to fend for herself, and she was entirely useless. Garrett was forced to pick up extra shifts at St. Mary's, the very public hospital where his career had started, just to bring in basic income. For a man who viewed himself as an elite surgeon, it was an absolute humiliation, but he had no choice. The intense stress sharpened his focus, or perhaps the sheer desperation finally allowed him to see reality clearly. One evening, Garrett returned home exhausted after working a double shift. He found Tiffany lounging on the couch, eating chocolates and watching reality TV. The house was a complete mess. "Tiffany," he said wearily, "did you call the attorney regarding the foreclosure notice on the house?" "No," she replied without looking up. "That stuff is boring, go get me some water." Garrett sighed and went to the kitchen. When he returned, Tiffany was shifting around on the couch to get comfortable. As she moved, her shirt pulled up slightly. Garrett froze. He was an obgyn. He had examined thousands of pregnant bellies. He knew the natural curve of the skin, the tension, the exact way a belly button stretches or flattens. What he was looking at right now simply didn't look right. The surface looked unnatural, far too smooth, and the shape was bizarre, shifting slightly to one side. "Tiffany," he said, taking a step closer, "is the baby okay? You haven't been to an appointment in weeks. Let me listen for a heartbeat. I have my stethoscope right here." Tiffany immediately jumped up, aggressively pulling her shirt down. "No, get away from me." I'm your husband and your doctor, Garrett insisted, his suspicion growing rapidly. Why won't you let me examine you? You're supposedly 7 months pregnant. I should easily be able to feel the movement. My doctor said you're a jinx, she screamed, backing away. You're full of stress and toxicity. Stay away from my baby. She ran upstairs and locked the bedroom door behind her. Garrett stood at the bottom of the stairs, his heart pounding. The pieces were finally starting to fit together. The champagne at the wedding, the refusal to let him touch her, the separate bedrooms, the total lack of ultrasound photos she claimed to always leave behind. He went into the guest room, lying in the dark and staring at the ceiling. Was it possible? Could she have faked the entire thing just to trap him? If there was no baby, then what did he destroy his marriage for? Why did he alienate his friends and ruin his life? He decided to find out. The next day, while Tiffany was taking a shower, she always locked the door, but he used a paperclip to pick the lock, an old trick from his teenage years. He slipped quietly into her room. He began searching through her drawers. Hidden beneath a pile of silk scarves, he found it, a receipt, not for baby clothes but from a theatrical supply company in Los Angeles. The item description read, prosthetic pregnancy belly, 2nd and 3rd trimester set, medical-grade silicone, adhesive included. Garrett felt the room spin. He collapsed onto the bed, clutching the receipt tightly. She was never pregnant. There was no heir, no legacy. He had thrown away a 10-year marriage to a loyal woman who loved him for exactly who he was, all for a fraud wearing a rubber stomach. He wanted to scream, to confront her immediately, but he realized he couldn't do it just yet, not while the federal investigation was actively ongoing. If he exposed the truth now, she might turn on him, blaming him for her father's corporate crimes to drag him down further. He was completely trapped inside her lie. He slipped the receipt into his pocket and walked out of the room. He went to work at the public hospital, a completely broken man, wandering the hallways like a ghost. He had lost absolutely everything. And the most brutal irony of all was that he found himself missing me more than ever. He missed my honesty, my reality. He had no idea that just a few miles away, his true child was preparing to enter the world. And fate, with its twisted sense of humor, was about to bring us together for one final, explosive collision. It was a Tuesday in late January. Chicago was experiencing the worst blizzard in a decade. The snow fell in heavy blankets, burying cars and completely paralyzing the city. The wind howled against the glass walls of my penthouse. I was 38 weeks pregnant. I still had 2 weeks until my due date, but clearly my son inherited my punctuality and decided early was better than late. It started with a sudden, intense contraction that took my breath away. Then my water broke. I was completely alone. Mitchell had gone home before the storm hit. I tried calling Dr. Alcott, but there was no answer. The lines were either down or overloaded. I immediately dialed 911. "We have a massive backlog of emergency calls right now," the dispatcher said, her voice cutting in and out. "Ambulances are literally stuck in the snow drifts. Can you safely make it to the nearest hospital on your own?" The nearest hospital wasn't St. Mary's where Dr. Alcott worked. That was all the way across town, completely unreachable in this weather. The closest facility was just 4 blocks away, Mercy General, an overloaded, underfunded public hospital. I had no choice. I wrapped myself in a heavy coat, grabbed my bag, and took the service elevator down. My doorman Robert looked absolutely terrified. "Ms. Vance, you can't go out there." "I have to," I managed to say through the pain. "Help me get a cab." There were no cabs. Robert, bless his heart, insisted on driving me in his own SUV. We moved at a snail's pace through the blinding whiteout. Every single bump brought agonizing pain. My blood pressure was skyrocketing, and I could hear a loud ringing in my ears. The preeclampsia Dr. Alcott had warned me about was fully setting in. We finally reached Mercy General. The emergency room looked like a complete war zone. People with frostbite, flu patients, car accident victims. It was absolute chaos. "I'm in labor," I shouted to the triage nurse. "High risk preeclampsia." They quickly moved me onto a gurney. My vision was starting to blur and I felt incredibly dizzy and nauseous. "We need an OB-GYN down here immediately," the nurse yelled. "Who is on duty?" "Dr. Stevens is currently in surgery." "Dr. Patel is completely snowed in," another nurse shouted back. "We only have the moonlighter, the guy who came over from private practice to pick up extra shifts during the blizzard." "Get him down here, now." I was rushed into the delivery room. The sheer pain left me nearly blind, and I drifted in and out of consciousness, just repeating the same prayer over and over. Save the baby. Please take me if you must, but save my baby. I heard the door slam open, followed by rushing footsteps and the sharp snap of latex gloves. What's the status? A man's voice demanded. It was a voice I knew better than my own, a voice that had whispered, I love you, and get out with equal intensity. Garrett. My heart practically stopped. Of all the hospitals in all the cities in all the world, he was right here. He was the moonlighter. He was the only person available to save us. I tried to sit up, but the monitors began blaring erratically. No, I whispered. He was wearing a surgical mask and cap, looking directly at the chart rather than my face. Blood pressure is 180/110. The baby's heart rate is dropping. We have cord compression, Garrett ordered, his voice commanding and completely stripped of the pathetic man I had seen in the news, replaced by the skilled surgeon I once admired. We need to deliver right now. Prepare the forceps, and ready the OR for an emergency C-section if we don't see immediate progress. He walked to the foot of the bed. Ma'am, I'm Dr. Vance. I'm going to help you deliver this baby. I need you to stay focused. Then he looked up and met my eyes. The entire room went completely dead silent. The blaring monitors seemed to fade away. His eyes went incredibly wide, and the color drained from his face, leaving him ghostly pale above his blue mask. He froze completely, his hands suspended in midair. Jocelyn, he gasped. The name came out like a combination of a prayer and a curse. He blinked rapidly as if trying to clear a hallucination. Jocelyn, you're... He looked down at my visibly pregnant belly. You're pregnant. I could practically see the gears turning in his head, the timeline, the math, the absolute shock. Then a flash of something ugly crossed his face, jealousy. Who is it? He stammered, his professional composure shattering. Did you remarry? Who did this? Garrett, I screamed as an intense contraction tore through me. Shut up, save my son, just save him. My scream snapped him right back to reality. A nurse grabbed his arm. Doctor, the baby's heart rate. Garrett shook his head rapidly. He closed his eyes for a split second, taking a deep breath. When he opened them, the ex-husband was gone and the doctor was fully back. Okay, he said, his voice shaking but firm. Okay, Jocelyn, listen to me. We can do this, I've got you. The next hour was a terrifying blur of pain and fear. My body felt like it was completely failing, and the intense blood pressure caused me to shake. But Garrett worked like a machine, showing a level of focus I had never seen before. He directed the nurses, moved his hands with precision, monitored the screens, and guided me through it. Push, Jocelyn, come on, I know you're strong. You are the strongest woman I have ever known, he shouted over the sound of the howling blizzard outside. Hearing him say that, the strongest woman I have ever known, felt like a knife twisting inside me. He knew it, deep down he had always known it, he just never valued that strength until he found himself weak. I can't do it, I sobbed, it hurts too much. Look at me, he pulled his mask down, revealing a face lined with intense stress and eyes rimmed with red. He looked 10 years older than when I left him. You do not give up on this baby, push for him. He was fighting with everything he had for a child he believed belonged to another man. He was saving the life of the woman he had cast aside. The sheer irony in that room was as thick as the scent of antiseptic. One more time, deep breath and push. With a scream that felt like it ripped directly from my soul, I gave it everything I had left. I felt the immense pressure suddenly release and a sense of emptiness leave my body. Then complete silence. For 3 agonizing seconds, there wasn't a single sound. Stimulate him, Garrett ordered, his voice cracking slightly as he rubbed the baby vigorously with a towel. Come on, little guy, breathe. Suddenly there was a tiny cough, a sputtering sound, and then a loud, angry cry filled the entire room. Time of birth 4:12 a.m., a nurse announced. I collapsed back onto the pillows, gasping for air as tears streamed down my face. Is he okay? Let me see him. Garrett didn't answer immediately. He stood by the warming table, cleaning the baby as the nurses stepped back. He went completely still, just staring down at the infant. He lifted the wiggling little boy, looking closely at his face. I saw Garrett's shoulders stiffen. He leaned in closer, turning the baby slightly to look at the back of his neck. The birthmark, the distinct Vance family trait. Right at the base of the hairline was a small, strawberry-shaped mark. Garrett had won and his father had won too. Garrett slowly turned around to face me, holding the baby as if he were made of fragile glass. His mask was pulled down and his mouth hung open in absolute shock. "This," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "This mark." He looked at the baby, then at me, then back at the baby. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The math finally added up perfectly. The barren womb, the broken branch, it was all a lie. I was already pregnant the exact night he kicked me out of our home. "Jocelyn," he choked out, is he mine?" I looked at him, completely exhausted, victorious and sorrowful all at once. "He is my son, Garrett. You gave up any claim to him the night you chose a fake heir and abandoned your true family." Garrett's knees completely gave out. He sank right down onto the linoleum floor, still holding the baby tightly against his chest, staring at the tiny face that mirrored his own. "Oh my God," he sobbed, a raw, painful sound. "Oh my God, what have I done?" The delivery room fell quiet, save for the baby's soft whimpering and Garrett's heavy, broken breathing. The nurses, sensing the deeply intense personal drama, kept their distance and focused on cleaning up the equipment. Garrett remained on the floor, weeping over his son, gently touching the baby's tiny fingers in absolute wonder. "I didn't know," he whispered, looking up at me with pleading eyes. "Jocelyn, I swear I didn't know. If I had known." "If you had known what?" I asked, my voice weak but sharp. "You wouldn't have kicked me out. You would have kept me around like an incubator while you continued to see Tiffany. Or maybe Bernice would have tried to take him away from me." "No," he said, shaking his head violently. I would have done better." "You should have done better without needing a condition attached, Garrett," I said. "You shouldn't need a child just to treat your wife like a human being." He flinched. The truth was a weapon, and I was using it with precision. He slowly stood up on shaking legs and brought the baby over, gently placing him in my arms. The moment my skin touched my son, the rest of the world completely vanished. He was absolutely perfect. He had dark hair just like Garrett, but he had my chin. He was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "Hi," I whispered to the baby. "I'm your mom, we made it." Garrett stood over us, his hands hovering in the air, completely unsure if he was even permitted to touch us. He looked like a ghost wandering through his own life. The very thing he claimed to want more than anything, a son, an heir, was right in front of him, yet he was completely locked out. "He's perfect," Garrett said, tears dripping from his chin. "He looks just like my dad." "He looks like you," I corrected. "Unfortunately." Garrett let out a dry, hollow laugh. "Yeah, poor kid." "I'm naming him Leo," I said, "because he's strong like a lion. He survived the storm." "Leo," Garrett repeated, testing the name. "It's a beautiful name." He reached out, gently running a single finger across Leo's cheek. Leo turned his head slightly and grasped Garrett's finger. Garrett broke down entirely again, covering his face with his other hand. "I ruined absolutely everything," he sobbed. "I threw away a diamond for a piece of glass. Tiffany, she was never even pregnant, Jocelyn. It was a complete fraud. She's been wearing a fake belly." I looked at him, the only surprise being that he had finally discovered the truth. "I know," I said. "I saw her drinking at your wedding." "You knew?" He looked completely stunned. "I saw everything, Garrett. I watched you struggle in that mansion. I saw your clinic fail. I saw the arrest." He took a step back, a sudden look of realization washing over his face. "The rent increase, the supply chain, the investors pulling out, that was all you." "I told you," I said calmly. "I am not a broken branch, I am the root, and when you cut the root, the tree dies." He stared at me, not with anger but with absolute awe and terror. "Your Phoenix Trust." I corrected. "Now I'm just Leo's mom." He looked at me and finally saw the incredibly powerful woman I had hidden for 10 years. He realized he had been sleeping next to a titan while treating her like a servant. The sheer shame on his face was undeniable. The adrenaline was finally fading and exhaustion was setting in, but Garrett refused to leave. He pulled a chair close to the bed, simply watching the two of us. "I can fix this," he said suddenly, a desperate gleam in his eyes. "Jocelyn, I can divorce her. I have the evidence of the fake pregnancy. I can testify against Carlton. I'll live in a studio apartment. I'll work 3 jobs. I'll do whatever it takes. Just let me be in his life. Let me come home." I looked at him, this broken, weeping man. A part of me, the part that had loved him for a decade, wanted to say yes. It wanted to believe people could genuinely change, wanted my son to grow up with his father. But then I remembered the check on the table, the Barren womb comment, the way he held Tiffany's hand. Garrett, I said softly, you can be his father, I will never stop you from knowing him, but you will never be my husband again. That door isn't just closed, it's been completely bricked over. Please, he begged, reaching out to hold my hand. I love you. I realized it far too late, but I love you. You love the memory of me, I said. You love the absolute security I provided, but you never respected me, and I love myself far too much to ever be with a man who had to lose everything just to realize my worth. He lowered his head onto the mattress in complete despair. It was a total tragedy, a family brought together by blood yet permanently severed by betrayal. Watching him kneel there in his surgical scrubs, weeping for the destruction he caused, I felt a strange sense of relief. I didn't need to yell at him. I didn't need to hurt him. Life had already done it for me. Just as Garrett was trying to compose himself and wipe away his tears, a sudden commotion erupted right outside in the hallway. We heard loud shouting, followed by the frantic, aggressive clicking of high heels on the linoleum floor. Where is he? I know he's in here, my useless excuse for a husband. Tiffany. Right behind her came Bernice's unmistakable, high-pitched screech. Garrett, what on earth are you doing in here delivering Barbies for free when our entire lives are completely falling apart? Garrett stood up immediately, his expression turning cold and hard. Oh no, he whispered. Not here, not right now. They followed you, I said, holding Leo tighter. They tracked your phone. The door was slammed open. Tiffany stood there, wrapped in an expensive fur coat that had likely been seized by the FBI but somehow stolen back. She looked absolutely unhinged. Her makeup was completely smeared and her hair was a messy nest, and beneath her tight dress that distinct belly was still prominently protruding. Bernice followed closely behind her, looking equally disheveled. The moment they saw me, they stopped dead in their tracks. They saw the baby in my arms and they saw Garrett standing protectively by the side of the bed. You, Tiffany shrieked, pointing a manicured finger directly at me. The ex-wife, I knew it. You're sleeping with him, you pathetic homewrecker. The absolute absurdity of it was stunning, the mistress calling the wife a homewrecker. And you have a baby, Bernice muttered, narrowing her eyes as she took a step closer. Whose child is that? Garrett immediately stepped between them and me. Don't you dare, he roared, using a tone of voice I had never heard from him before. Don't you dare speak to her like that. That is my son. The statement echoed through the room like a gunshot. Your son, Bernice gasped, clutching her pearls tightly. But, she's barren, she's far too old. She is the only real woman I have ever known, Garrett said fiercely, and she gave me my only true child, unlike her. He pointed an angry finger directly at Tiffany. Tiffany's eyes went wide. She realized he knew. A flash of pure panic crossed her face, quickly replaced by intense rage. You liar, she screamed. I am carrying your heir and you're in here with this old witch. She lunged forward. I wasn't sure if she wanted to strike me or grab the baby, but she charged toward the bed like a banshee. No, Garrett yelled, grabbing her arm. They began to struggle, a pathetic, ugly scuffle. Tiffany clawed at his face while Garrett tried to restrain her without causing physical harm. Get off me, I'll destroy her, I'll destroy that little brat, Tiffany shrieked. In the absolute chaos, Bernice tried to intervene, grabbing Garrett's arm. Stop it, don't hurt the baby, my grandson, she yelled, referring to Tiffany's fake pregnancy. That was the exact moment the truth was fully exposed. Trying to create distance, Garrett gave Tiffany a firm push backward. Tiffany stumbled, losing her balance completely in her high heels, and landed heavily right on her backside. Thud. It wasn't the sound of breaking bones. It was a dull, hollow, distinctly plastic sound. As Tiffany scrambled to get back up, her dress rode up. The belly, the silicone prosthetic, had shifted completely out of place. It had slid all the way up to the side of her ribcage, looking bizarre, like a strange growth moving across her torso. The room went completely dead silent. The nurses who had rushed in to help froze in place. Even Bernice stopped screaming, staring intently at her daughter-in-law's midsection, where a baby should have been but was completely missing, while the baby was currently resting right near her left armpit. Tiffany, Bernice whispered, her voice shaking violently. What is that? Tiffany looked down, frantically trying to push the prosthetic back into place and adjust her dress. It's severe swelling. It's a medical condition. It's a pillow, Mom, Garrett said, his voice entirely cold and lifeless. It's a piece of rubber. There is no baby, there never was. Bernice looked at Tiffany's misshapen torso, then at the very real, crying baby in my arms. The realization completely broke her. Her knees buckled and she slid right down the wall onto the floor. No, Bernice groaned, weeping openly. No, I gave up everything. I sold my home. I treated Jocelyn like absolute dirt, all for a fake. Tiffany stood up, completely dropping the act, her face twisted into a vicious sneer. So what? You idiots completely deserved it. You were so desperate for a wealthy daughter-in-law you didn't even bother to check the facts. And you, she glared at Garrett, you're just a gullible fool, a greedy, weak little man. She turned her gaze to me. You think you won, you're still just a lonely old woman with a screaming brat. I am a mother, I said calmly, and I am a billionaire, and you, Tiffany, are about to become a convicted felon. What? She laughed nervously. Mitchell, I called out. Mitchell stepped into the room from the hallway, bringing reinforcements with him. Right behind him were 2 police officers and a federal agent. Tiffany Sterling, the agent said, stepping forward. We have a warrant for your arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and aiding and abetting Carlton Sterling in his money laundering operations. We know those offshore accounts are in your name. The color drained from Tiffany's face so fast she looked like a corpse. No, Daddy said I was safe. He said my accounts were hidden. Your father turned on you an hour ago in exchange for a reduced sentence, the agent said dryly. Turn around, hands behind your back. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Tiffany let out a piercing scream, not of fear but of pure, shattered privilege. This is a mistake, my dress, you're hurting me. Garrett, do something. Garrett stood there with his arms crossed, looking at her with pure disgust. I am doing something, he said. I'm watching the trash get taken out. As they dragged a kicking and screaming Tiffany away, the fake belly finally slipped completely out from under her dress, rolling across the hospital floor. The pink silicone mound lay there amidst the chaos, the perfect symbol of their entire deception, completely hollow, fake, and discarded. The officers then turned their attention to Bernice, who was still weeping on the floor. Bernice Vance, the officer asked. I didn't do anything, she wailed. I'm just an old woman. We have surveillance footage proving you assisted Ms. Sterling in transferring hidden funds at the bank last week, Mitchell interjected, holding up a legal folder. Technically, that makes you an accessory to money laundering. I didn't know, she sobbed. Tiffany told me it was money for the nursery. Tell it to the judge, the officer said, pulling her to her feet. Bernice looked desperately at Garrett. Son, help me, don't let them take me away. Garrett looked at his mother, the woman who poisoned his marriage, who pushed him toward Tiffany, who called his true son a brat. You wanted the Sterling lifestyle, Mom, Garrett said softly. Now you've got it, where they go you go. He turned his back on her. Bernice let out a desperate, echoing wail as she was led away in handcuffs, shuffling right past the silicone belly on the floor. Finally the room fell quiet. It was just me, Leo, Garrett and Mitchell. Mitchell gave me a respectful nod. The paperwork is filed, Jocelyn. The restraining order is active and the divorce is officially finalized. You are entirely free. Thank you, Mitchell, I said. Garrett looked at me, completely stripped of everything. He had no wife, no mother, no private practice, and likely no home. He stood directly in the ruins of his own life. I have nothing left, he whispered. You still have your hands, I told him. You're a doctor, go save lives, and this time do it for the right reasons. Not for money, not for status, but simply to help people. He nodded slowly. Can I come see Leo tomorrow? I looked down at my son, sleeping peacefully in the aftermath of the storm. Contact my attorney, I said. We will establish a proper visitation schedule. He deserves to know his father. But Garrett, don't ever be late, and don't bring a single bit of drama. My son comes first. I promise, he said brokenly. I promise. He walked out of the room with his head down, stepping right over the fake belly without even looking back. The next few days were a blur of recovery and handling legal details. I remained in the hospital for a week to monitor my blood pressure. By the time I was discharged, the sun was shining bright, the snow was melting, and the city looked clean again. The media is going absolutely wild, Mitchell told me in the car. The fake belly scandal is trending everywhere. People are calling you the Iron Lady for bringing them down. I don't care about the news, I said, looking at Leo in his car seat. I only care about peace. When we arrived back at the penthouse, it felt completely different. Before, it was a lonely fortress. Now, filled with baby supplies, soft blankets, and the scent of milk, it finally felt like a real home. Garrett kept his word. He showed up for his visits precisely on time. He looked entirely different, trading his expensive Italian suits for simple clothing. He looked exhausted from working double shifts at the public hospital to pay off his debts and legal fees, but he looked genuinely humbled. We sat in the living room, and he held Leo for an hour, just speaking to him softly. "I'm sorry I won't be able to buy you a pony, kiddo," he whispered to the baby. "Daddy made some terrible choices, but I will teach you how to throw a ball, and I will teach you how to respect women. That is the most important lesson in life." I watched them from the kitchen. It was a bittersweet feeling. We could have been a family. We could have experienced this happiness without all the trauma, but perhaps the trauma was entirely necessary. Perhaps Garrett needed to be completely broken before he could be put back together, and perhaps I needed to be pushed straight to the edge to discover my true strength. Before he left, Garrett paused at the door. "Jocelyn," he said, "I know I can never fix what I broke, but I want you to know that you were the best thing that ever happened to my life, and I was an absolute fool who failed to read the fine print." "What fine print?" I asked. "That love isn't about what you can extract from someone," he said. "It's about what you build together. I personally tore down our building. Thank you for saving the foundation." He took one final look at Leo, then walked toward the elevator. I locked the door behind him, feeling a massive weight lift from my chest. I didn't hate him anymore. Hate takes far too much energy. I simply felt free. 1 year later, I sat on my penthouse terrace, watching Leo take his very first wobbly steps toward the glass railing. The summer breeze was warm, and life had settled into a beautiful rhythm. I had officially returned to the investment world, no longer hiding in the shadows. I was Jocelyn Vance, CEO of the Phoenix Fund. I used my wealth to establish a foundation dedicated entirely to women, specifically helping older women who had been abandoned after divorce to start businesses and completely regain control of their lives. Garrett was still working at the public hospital, living in a small apartment. He paid child support precisely on time every single month, even though I didn't need the money at all. He said it was for the sake of his own dignity. During his weekend visits, he proved to be an excellent father to Leo. He never remarried, dedicating his entire life strictly to medicine and his son, finding his own redemption in that quiet, hard service. Bernice was serving time in a low-security facility. She occasionally sent letters, blaming Tiffany, blaming the government, and blaming me. I never opened a single one. They went straight into the shredder. Tiffany was serving a 5-year sentence for fraud. Last I heard, she was working in the prison laundry room. I picked Leo up, spinning him around as his laughter filled the warm air. "Look at the world, baby," I said, pointing out at the expansive skyline. "It's incredibly big and it belongs to you." I thought back to that evening at the dining table, the $175,000 check, the comment about the barren womb. They tried to bury me, but they had absolutely no idea that I was a seed. To every woman listening to my story, especially those who feel completely invisible, who feel like they've given everything to someone else only to be left with nothing, listen to me. You are not a broken branch to be snapped in half. You are the entire tree. You are the shelter. Do not ever let anyone tell you that your worth is tied to your youth, your husband, or your ability to please others. Your true value lies in your resilience. It lies in your mind. It lies deep in your heart. If someone kicks you out of their home, don't just walk away. Go build a castle they could never hope to reach. My name is Jocelyn Vance. I was once an abandoned wife. Today I am a mother, a billionaire, and the sole author of my own destiny. And let me tell you, the view from the top is absolutely magnificent.